Hello, I'm Scott Jaschik, editor of Inside Higher Ed. Welcome to today's webcast on revamping curriculum management, optimizing academic operations. We're very excited to have you here today. I'm joined by Doug Lederman, my fellow editor, who's in Boston today, but will be with us. And we're very, we really want to get your questions and comments on this issue. But first, some housekeeping. To ask questions, you will see a Q&A box on your screen. You can ask a question at any time. Doug and I will be answering questions in the second half of this presentation. But please ask at any time. You can indicate whether you want or don't want us to use your name, and include any context that you think will be helpful. If your institution would be relevant, even just if it's public or private, or has any sort of special mission, please feel free to include that. We are recording today's webcast for those with hearing disabilities. And we very much want to thank Coursedog for sponsoring this webcast and the booklet that we published on the same topic that you'll all receive if you haven't already. So now I think we're ready to begin. Here is Doug's and my contact information. Please feel free to reach out at any time that you want to talk about anything in higher ed, in addition to the topics in this webcast. In talking about reforming the curriculum or changing the curriculum, there are a few things that I wanted to say at the beginning. One is very exciting, the thrill of creating the means to teach students something new or in a new way. This is, central to why many people become academics in the first place. And it really goes to the calling that many in academe feel for, for their professions. This is truly exciting to think about a new branch of scholarship that you're going to teach to your students. A new way to shape the way they view the world as they're starting their adult careers. That is just really a great thing to do. But there's a downside. There's the danger of messing up a way of learning that has stood the test of time. Whatever your reform, whatever the discipline is, or if it's cross-disciplinary, the way that has been used may well be working, or maybe working in part. And a lot of people may be invested in that way of doing something. And if you change it, some may not like the idea of changing it. Some may not like the way it works. You may develop a curriculum that you discover needs a little time to work. All of that comes into play with this danger reality. And then the last reality is that financial considerations also matter. We just ran this week our survey of provosts, and the provosts admitted freely, as they have in previous years, that in talking about starting a new program, a big issue is financial considerations to use. They are, financial considerations matter a lot to colleges, particularly colleges without a large endowment, but all colleges these days truly need to think about who's going to enroll, who's going to come, all of that. And that may not necessarily be because of, the best thing in the curriculum, but the financial considerations hugely matter. And that's part of what they're thinking about. So now I want to talk about a few examples of colleges that have engaged in this rethinking of what they're doing, and talk about why they changed and how they're going to to run their curriculum going forward. First off, we've got Salem College. Salem is a small college. It doesn't even have 1,000 students. It is a women's liberal arts college, or has been a women's liberal arts college in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And as you can see from one of the banners there, it is a very old college. It's been around since 1772. which not many colleges can have that kind of history in the United States, although it has gone through several phases, and currently runs both a girls' high school and a women's college. And Salem has been, struggling a bit to attract students who embrace the liberal arts mission. And so what they have done is they are reorienting their entire curriculum to be based on health and leadership for women in the health fields. And this is a pretty radical change for Salem or for any college. They are, including 3 new majors: health sciences, health humanities, and health advocacy. And they're truly trying to reorient the entire place around health, which would seem like a very logical thing to do. But at a liberal arts college, at a small liberal arts college, it's also a bit risky. You don't know what's going to happen, if students are going to truly respond to this. They just announced this last year, so we don't know yet, how it's going to turn out. But they decided that they needed to make a change. Now, other small liberal arts colleges, actually women's colleges, have made in some ways similar changes. Agnes Scott College in Georgia made a change that involves internationalization and everyone going, having the opportunity to go abroad, at least when we're not having a pandemic. But Salem's changes truly changed the curriculum at Salem. The key reason that Salem acted was to differentiate itself from other colleges. They said the key to getting more students is to be absolutely unique, or pretty unique, in what you do. And so as they were reshaping their curriculum, that is what they were mainly thinking about. Doug, did you want to add here?
I do, and thanks. Welcome everybody. I want to echo Scott's thanks to you and for joining us. I wanted to hit the point that again, the point that Scott made near the end, which is we are increasingly in an era where being
Doug, we're not hearing you. I'm going to assume that we'll get Doug back and he'll add his point later. But Doug, if you can hear me, that's why I'm just moving ahead, because I'm sure you would have made good points. The University of Nebraska at Kearney is another example of a university. In this case, it's a public university, and it's a public university that is part of a large public system. But Kearney is one of the smaller parts of the university. And they've decided this year to eliminate the philosophy major. Now, that was hugely upsetting to the students who were studying philosophy and the faculty who were teaching it. But there were very few students actually majoring in philosophy. The university did a study that found that in recent years, they had had an average of 2 students in the major. And that was not enough, they said. And that was their primary rationale for ending the major. Now, supporters of the change said a number of things. One is that it's impossible to provide for everyone. As a regional public university, that the university wasn't going to necessarily meet every person's interests. And they also said that you just have to get along with fewer options when an option is getting so few students to take it. And so they eliminated it. Now, Kearney, in some ways, this was very typical of what's gone on at regional universities and also at private universities. They don't have enough money to teach everything, and they are phasing out in some cases, smaller majors. It's just the way, just the reality of what is happening. That doesn't mean it's right, because supporters of the philosophy program at Kearney and elsewhere said the real thing that was happening was that students not majoring in philosophy were taking philosophy courses, and that their value shouldn't be measured by just the number of majors, but also by the number of people who were using their systems to teach and to learn. The next thing I want to talk about is a military appointment at Swarthmore. This is not an appointment of a president, but the appointment of a faculty member as part of a collaboration that Swarthmore engaged in with a foundation that believes that having military voices at liberal arts colleges is a good thing. Now, you may think, and to some, this was an important voice in society, would be welcomed. A major part of that change was that Swarthmore, like most liberal arts colleges, and not because of anything Swarthmore does, its students and faculty lean left. And I'm not saying the military all leans right, but a military perspective would be different for most Swarthmore students to encounter. And they did want to encounter that perspective. So at Swarthmore, they're doing this program. It's one faculty member at a time, and you might think it's not huge, but to many, it was a direct slap at Swarthmore's pacifist history. Swarthmore's roots are in the Quaker church, and they are very anti-war. So there was quite a bit of, I shouldn't say fighting because it's Swarthmore and they wouldn't fight, but there was quite a bit of civilized debate over this issue, and ultimately the president decided that the program was important to go on, but it wasn't unanimous by any stretch of the imagination, and so this is just typical of the kinds of debates that happen at colleges on curricular matters. Now I'm going to talk about diversity goals and the curriculum, because of late, everyone's been thinking and talking about diversity and how to make a more diverse program of courses and a more diverse curriculum. And there are various ways to do this. One is to add to existing courses. If you look at, say, a course about American history or a course about world literature, one question to ask is, who are you studying? Is this just a course about the white men in American history, or does it also include women and minority groups and the way they have influenced history and have been affected by history? So one possibility is to just take a look at the curriculum and to take a look at which courses should have a portion that involves minority or women, and adding them. Another thing that sort of goes deeper is to actually create new courses. And most colleges and universities have a system for creating new courses, and it involves a lot of review and a lot of regulation about that process. Creating a new course, while it goes on all the time, but particularly related to diversity, is a great thing that many colleges are doing this. And then the next level is instituting new requirements. This accepts that you can create a new course or a bunch of new courses, and no one may take them, or very few may take them, or very few people who are not a member of a minority group may take them. Instituting new requirements is necessary, many would say, to get the message out, so that everyone can learn and experience it going forward. So instituting new requirements also is a key part of what happens. Then there's the question of facing legislative hurdles. In recent months, really, many state legislatures have gotten involved in the curriculum and said, you shall not teach whatever. We'll talk in subsequent slides about some of the things that have happened in that area. But the reality is the colleges are operating on the one hand on a, sort of going on the offensive, saying we think students should learn this. On the other hand, they're going on the defensive with state legislators telling them that they shouldn't teach certain things. This is relatively, well, I don't say it's relatively recent. It was around a long time ago, but now it's happening with increasing frequency in key states, and it's causing a lot of problems. And that's what I want to talk about. Oh, actually, I think Doug is coming back. Doug, would you like to make the point you were making?
Sorry about that, folks. Love wonders of travel. My internet cut out in the hotel I'm in. The point I was trying to make, you've presumably moved on, but was that differentiation is absolutely essential in an era when most institutions are tuition driven, and and many of them boast about the same things and sort of focus on the same things. It is impossible, I think, or being increasingly difficult in an era with where the demographics and the number of traditional age students are shrinking, unless institutions alter who they're going after, which students they're going after. They're going to have to be more sharply define what their mission is and what their sort of value proposition is. And some people may be uncomfortable talking about the curriculum in that way, but a key part of what differentiates institutions is what they teach and how they teach it. And that's going to be what sort of increasingly attracts students, enough students to be sustainable. So that's all I wanted to say. Probably not worth waiting for, but go ahead.
Okay, so Iowa State and diversity, what happened? So Iowa State, or the state of Iowa first, passed a law this year that barred teaching divisive concepts. Now, what that means in the college connection is sort of unclear, but this happened and this affected the way Iowa State went about instituting a new diversity requirement. The university considers diversity in a number of ways, but they wanted to require all students to analyze systemic oppression and personal prejudice and their impacts on students and faculty members. So the university, the lawyers got together and they decided that if they were to require students to do that, that they would be potentially violating the new law. And so they didn't want to violate the new law. They also didn't want to tell anyone what not to teach. So they did a compromise where the diversity requirement was one of 4 areas that everyone had to study. And they instead made it, you have to study 3 of those 4 areas. So no student was required to study the systematic oppression and personal prejudice. Now, some say that Iowa State went too far in compromising. Others say they probably didn't have a choice because of where they're located. But this is the kind of thing that comes up and that may come up again as colleges think about these issues. I also want to remind you about, you can ask questions at any time just put them in the bubble in the on your screen, and we'll get to them later. Now I want to switch to Florida. The Iowa law was not well known outside of Iowa. Florida has a tendency to be very well known in terms of the laws that they adopt, and so it got a lot of attention this year. And last week, the president of the University of Florida distributed a PowerPoint, of which this is the first page or one of the pages, that tried to instruct what they could teach and not teach under the law. This is a very important bill to Florida, because the University of Florida is at risk of losing $106 million if it is found in violation of the law. And that's enough money to get people's attention. Very, very decisively will get people's attention. And so they were talking about what they can teach. And there are definitely certain things that would strike most faculty members as appropriate to teach. That it again goes to the discomfort caused in the student body. And many professors would say, if they're not making somebody uncomfortable, they're probably not doing their jobs. And they'd probably be right. But it doesn't matter completely if the Florida legislature disagrees. And there are multiple laws at play here. And so that is what's going on now in Florida. Doug, did you want to add here?
Well, yeah, I think if you combine the last two slides in your minds, we could decide how broadly to go here, but we are in an era of increasing partisanship in our politics and divisiveness in our more broadly in our communications with each other, and I think the inclination of legislators and politicians to sort of cross lines into areas that they have historically viewed as off limits. And I'm not necessarily judging whether or not it is appropriate for legislators to pay attention to or to sort of pass laws that sort of dictate the curriculum. But I think it's unquestioned that we are seeing more of that and more willingness to do that. And I don't think that's, it's all the bills about critical race theory that are cropping up in legislatures around the country. And I think this is going to be, I think institutions have always had to worry and pay attention to, public institutions particularly, to sort of to whether they have had to look over their shoulder. But I think there's an increasing tendency, an increasing activism on the part of legislators, and I think that's going to be an increasing problem particularly for public institutions. Although again, some of these laws are going to probably affect private institutions in their states as well, and it's not a factor among the factors that that institutions have historically thought about when they've been designing their curriculums. I think some of them are going to have to add this to that list.
Definitely. Now I want to talk about small rural states, because what goes on in small rural states is frequently under the radar. It's not necessarily covered in the national press, although we've been paying attention. So take Maine. Maine wants to train 700 students over 3 years for jobs to be like IT support, customer service, for basic entry-level jobs for their careers. The students are spread throughout the state, and Maine is quite large, and many of the students don't want online education or to leave home. These are factors that will create a real frustration for a community college system that wants to train students in their fields. What Maine is doing is offering some online, some in-person instruction for 6 to 9 months, a 6 to 9 month program, and an additional program if the students want to train to be a supervisor. And this is, this is just, I give it to you as an example where this doesn't involve the culture wars or any of the controversies going on, but this involves, truly the mission of the colleges, thinking about the curriculum and thinking about reforming it. And that is, very good for them to do, but, is something that frequently isn't funded and creates different issues, such as, whether the instruction should be in person or online for the colleges. Now I want to talk about general education at community colleges and at four-year colleges. Some of this is the same, but some of it is different at community colleges. Generally, while it's not known by the public, community colleges, in fact, have general education. They set out a series of courses, just like at four-year colleges, and say you must have taken a certain number in this area and that area to receive an associate degree. But we ran an op-ed by Terry O'Banion of the League, formerly of the League for Innovation, and Cindy Miles, who was former chancellor at Grossmont Community College, in which they argued that when people are talking about general education at community colleges, they are sort of ignoring the fact that they may put out all these courses and they may not make up a cohesive education. Nobody may be thinking how that can be a cohesive education. And that's interesting because at four-year colleges, there's a similar problem. This also, I want to refer to the provost survey that we just published. And we asked provosts, are you pleased with your the education, the general ed requirements that you have? Overwhelmingly, they were pleased. But we then asked, do you think most students understand the gen ed requirements? And overwhelmingly, they didn't. And I guess my question is, if you care about general education or any of your requirements, how can you not be upset to think that most students don't understand, or they understand general education only as, well, this is a requirement. I need to do this, this, and this. One from A, column A, one from column B, et cetera, to graduate. But are they aware that you actually have educational goals for them, that you are trying to make them see? And we'll close with general education, just because, at colleges, this is one of the important questions that comes up, is how do you want to reform your gen ed or all of your ed courses, and it's so important, but sometimes I think maybe doesn't get the attention it deserves. We'll now turn to questions. You can still ask a question, and I hope you'll do so. Doug, do you have a first question?
I do. It's a little broad, but do institutions need to be thinking differently today from how they did previously when it comes to their curriculums, both what they teach and how they teach it? I think unquestionably so. It's the conference I was at up here in Boston with our new partner, Times Higher Education, was about the focus of it was on digital teaching and learning. And so a lot of it was about sort of the role of digital instruction in the curriculum. But a lot of the, which is more about the how it's delivered, but a lot of the conversation was about the what, and sort of, and to some extent the intersection there. But I guess what I think some of the conversation here and some of the conversation that we've been listening in on in recent months and is about sort of, there are a different set of pressures and considerations, I think, that institutions probably should be taking into account now. One of them was on Scott's initial slide about financial considerations. I think that first slide that showed sort of the excitement, what ultimately it's about serving the mission. And I think that is unchanged. Institutions in deciding what the nature of their instruction should be and the nature of their curriculum should be. Ultimately, it's about serving the mission. What I think is a little different today is the sort of the differences, and I think the greater inclination to take the context and not student interest, like, oh, we should only be teaching the topics and disciplines that students want to study. But I guess sort of in thinking about kind of what the expectations of what graduates are supposed to be able to do, and the kinds of competencies and skills that they're going to have. Now, I think a lot of those the skills and competencies that employers want and that we want graduates to have are unchanged from forever, in terms of some of the core writing and communication and critical thinking skills. But I do think, for instance, that there's a lot of people who think that graduates need to come out with some kind of digital fluency and maybe a little bit more numeracy than a skill than they historically had. So, and I think, again, a lot of the skills that we want students to have can be delivered and developed through just about any kind of sort of curricular content. So in some ways, I think that the expectations are maybe more about what the curriculum allows students to develop. But I think there is a little bit of a shift, I think, in terms of, for a lot of institutions, away from teaching what the faculty is interested in teaching to teaching what we think students and those who thinking about students' needs and what we want students to come out with. The other factor, which again I think is more intense than ever before, is around the financial implications. And I do think that we saw a lot of institutions I think it's going to be harder and harder for many institutions to have as broad a curriculum as they have historically had, at least not without greater potential sharing among institutions. And I think it's going to be difficult for every institution to continue to deliver all of the disciplines and that they historically have completely on their own. I just think the financial realities at a lot of institutions are going to make that difficult. So I think those are just a couple of sort of, I guess, ascendant factors that I would say are influencing what and how institutions teach.
Here's a question. I am very concerned about what I see as an over-accommodating, appeasement even, of another department at my institution to preemptively avoid any controversy from outside legislators that deny systemic racism, similar to how you describe in Iowa. It is not my department. What should somebody in my position do? Can you broadly address this? So the way to address it is the way many faculty members in Iowa and Florida and elsewhere are, by speaking out. You can speak out. Last I checked, and talk about why this doesn't work. Talking about, one, the students in higher education are presumed to be, legal adults, most of them, and that you can tell them something and it doesn't need necessarily change their minds. I mean, in Iowa, if Iowa was constantly educating students in liberal ideas, as some of the legislators seem to believe, I would look at how Iowa votes in elections. Then they're electing more Republicans than Democrats. I mean, it's just not the case that there is some sort of indoctrination going on. and you should talk about it, and talk about it loudly, and talk about it in different courses, and explain that not every course is designed to make students uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean that a student can't be made to feel uncomfortable. I think it's the real live examples that will have the most potential to get through to people. And I would urge you to share. Doug?
Sure. What suggestions do you have for getting out of the cycle of faculty resisting curricular change because it disrupts existing tenure lines? Faculty rightfully have control of the curriculum at many institutions. They also have personal investments in their jobs that resist change. This makes change very difficult. You know, a couple of the slides, I think in this presentation, the Nebraska Kearney one addresses sort of we regularly see institutions revising their curriculums, updating their curriculums, doing these program reviews, and this question is right that there's often faculty pushback, and some of it I think is certainly personally motivated. I think where I think the failure is in a lot of these instances is in communication about the goals. I think, I'm not going to certainly step into any single one of these, but what the pattern that I think we see a fair bit are institutions. Some institutions I think use kind of flawed measurements about sort of how to judge the interest in and relevancy of a department or discipline or major at their institution. But I think, so again, going back to the point I made before about the financial implications, it is many institutions are going to, I believe, have trouble continuing to have the full, teach as many disciplines, have as many departments as they historically have. So there are almost always going to be fights over that. And that's just the nature of things. I think the leadership challenge comes in explaining why certain majors or disciplines or departments no longer allow the institution to best fulfill its mission. And I think a lot of institutions and institutional leaders are very mushy about mission and don't do a good job, especially defining and defending a change in that mission or the ways in which the way the institution should carry out its mission has changed. And honestly, if that's not the reason for the change, if it's truly just finances, I think a lot more transparency about that would be useful. I think most institutions get into trouble through lack of transparency about these decisions and about the processes that lead to them. So again, I'm not suggesting at all that transparency alone is going to fix it, but transparency with involvement of the right people, including the faculty, in these decisions, I think is essentially all an institution can really do to try to ensure ultimate embrace of decisions like this, but they are always going to be controversial.
Here's another question. I was thinking the same thing. This was addressed to me with my answer to the previous question, with faith as well as political opinions. Is there a line to be drawn with regard to these pushbacks? Is free speech and expression, our free speech and expression available for everyone, including those groups that are not considered protected? I would say free speech and expression should be protected for all groups. And I think one of the ways that many colleges have gotten criticized, perhaps unfairly, perhaps not, is that they have let some groups seem to dominate the free speech debates. But if you believe in free speech, you have to truly believe it's for everyone. And I think colleges can invite people of faith. Now, there are limits on a public university and faith, but we're not talking about requiring church services for all students. But you can have a speaker series to which you can invite a range of views. You can encourage in multiple viewpoints in classes, and have debates in classes on issues. It's very important, I think, for colleges to truly be seen as places that don't just say free speech matters when they're trying to defend some controversial speaker, but that truly live the free speech argument. And and to truly have free speech means that some of those who are speaking will be speaking strongly with views you disagree with, and you have to accept that. Doug?
I'm going to sort of respond to a comment here that's sort of aligned. Faculty should be thinking about, quote, real world application for every class taught. And I think that's when I was talking before about the considerations of sort of curricular development. I sort of push back against the idea. I mean, there's a real tendency to make oppositional vocationalism and pure academic pursuit, and I understand that tendency to make those binary. I think it's foolhardy and damaging, honestly. I am a deep believer in the value of the liberal arts, and I very much believe that, as I said before, a lot of the sort of, quote, vocational skills, or at least the skills that employers want, that will make graduates valued and will in the workforce, and therefore I think will make degrees and other credentials valuable, is around are the things that are embedded in a strong liberal arts education. Having said that, I think there are certain more practical skills that group work, which weirdly, it's sort of, I don't know, it may not strike some of you as a practical skill, but it is one of the things that employers want, and it's not developed very well by a lecture. It's much better developed by active learning techniques and strategies. And so again, when we're thinking about the curriculum, again, I think a lot of the conversation we've talked about here is about different disciplines. But I think a lot of the work that institutions need to do is about the how things are delivered, because I think most disciplines, surely there are some disciplines that can be argued are more relevant now than others. But honestly, I don't think that's the big problem. I think the bigger problem for higher education is proving that people come out of those disciplines with the really core traits that most of us want to see in our workers, but also in our friends and our colleagues, and everything else are the things that make people good thinkers. And I think there are things that sort of can be embedded in the curriculum, regardless of discipline, that can make employees and people better able to fulfill their functions in society. And I think that's in some ways the heaviest work that institutions collectively need to be doing.
Speaking out is a theoretically good approach. However, for public institutions, the funding of the institution is controlled by those legislative bodies, even if the state provides a limited portion of the institution's budget. Sharing our stories is an important means to change the narrative that institutions of higher education are indoctrinating students and pushing a liberal agenda. My question is, what is an effective mechanism for doing so effectively? A liberal arts education and disciplines that are not perceived as career directed are misunderstood by the general population and legislators. I totally agree that they're misunderstood. But I think that actually some colleges are working very hard to change that. For instance, I wrote about Wake Forest a few years ago. They have a program where every discipline compiles a list of what each of their graduates in recent years is doing, not with their names, but they just say, you know, so-and-so studied this and is doing whatever. And what it shows is that liberal arts disciplines aren't training people to be necessarily what their field is. I'm a history major. I am not a historian. And that is so important. But my study of history, it was fascinating to me. It remains fascinating to me. And it certainly has directed how I think about things. But this list, and this was a list of just people a few years out, you know, I remember looking at the art history department list. And art history you might think of as a classic discipline where nobody's going to, you know, get a job or whatever, or they're just going to jobs working at a coffee shop. Well, what it showed was that their liberal arts, that their recent graduates in art history were doing things like teaching public school, working in an art gallery, working as an artist, and things that had nothing to do with art history. There were business jobs in there, sales, marketing, whatever. And the thing that Wake Forest did that I think is really smart is they didn't say, oh, well, X% are this, Y% are that. They listed every single job, every single person, and they went through great effort to get as many people as possible. And somebody looking at that would realize that Wake Forest in their art history major was training people for good careers, but not in art history. And that's the thing that we really need. I think the liberal arts really needs to get understood, is that they are preparing people for careers. It's just not directly for careers. And I think if colleges can make that case, they will be much better off with prospective students who look at those lists, and with their parents who look at these lists, and they should send it to legislators. And the legislators would see that these people are employed and doing very well. Doug?
Do you, question is about, the question here is about sort of more about the sort of how of curriculum delivery. Do you anticipate many institutions rethinking the credentials they offer as they review their curriculums? Listen, I think the way, and again, this goes back a little bit to whether the extent to which institutions are going to respond to their sense of what the world demands of them at a certain moment. And I do believe, and again, I don't want to overstate this because I think there will always continue to be some meaningful number of students who want a sort of full-time residential experience, but I think especially with the demographic changes that are ahead of us showing a real decline in the number of traditional age students, I think more and more institutions are going to have to be thinking about serving what we used to call non-traditional learners. We probably need another phrase from that, since the traditional learners are no longer the majority. But I do think working adults and others who are place bound and all sorts of things, and I think this idea that more and more and learners 10 years after they got their undergraduate degree, who need additional skills to adapt to the changes in the economy, et cetera. I do think more and more institutions are going to be having to rethink the idea of full-time, straight through degree programs, creating more sort of shorter duration units. It also feeds that the cost and price issues in higher education and the affordability issues are another influence of that. But I think in terms of sort of reading the room and reading the market, I think there's going to be increasing inclination and need for institutions to sort of, again, regardless of what they're teaching, thinking about sort of dividing the unit of learning into shorter units and not assuming that it's all going to be consecutive. I think that's going to be increasingly the way that we learn.
Here's an interesting question. A diverse group of educational professionals, along with other ethnic, religious, and LGBTQIA organizations, should maybe review the curriculum before it's taught. Well, perhaps, but I think you also need to consider how diverse that group will be, and to invite the outside groups to review your curriculum may be an invitation to allow other groups to review the curriculum that you don't want reviewing it. Now, it's certainly appropriate for faculty members to go and seek out views of different ethnic and religious and lesbian, gay groups about their curriculum, but also they should be going out to business groups and others in the community who care deeply about what's going on. So I would, just be careful how you phrase things like that, or you may not like the results. Doug?
Yeah, so a couple other good questions in here. Have you thought about the topic of revamping the curriculum in terms of the structural aspects of the curriculum, e.g. high stakes tests, unreasonable prerequisites, narrow attendance policies, and antiquated pedagogies, not recognizing student prior learning, et cetera, versus the curriculum itself? And that's, I appreciate that question, because I've been trying to sort of push in that direction in some of my comments, because I do think that I guess I'm generally a believer that there is well, let me state it a different way. I think the pandemic, and we haven't, this is one of those rare webcasts where we haven't mentioned the pandemic a whole lot. There's usually a slide in and of itself, but I do think that the pandemic had a pretty significant impact here in terms of forcing rethinking of pedagogy. And again, I think I probably the interweaving of curriculum and pedagogy is sometimes it's hard to draw a line, and this presentation focuses on the curriculum, which is why I think a lot of our comments have. But I do think that pedagogy is deeply intertwined here, and I think we probably saw more rethinking of pedagogy and how the curriculum is taught than about the curriculum itself, because of the recognition of the strain that students were under and the strain that instructors were under, and everything up to and including concerns about cheating. And so I'd like to think that the pandemic has forced, in part by forcing a greater sort of engagement with technology, what would be and a sort of the need to teach in a completely different format, did force a lot of professors to, including some who probably were wanted to but hadn't made the time, and then others who probably never really cared about it, about changing things up, but forced some changes. And I'm sure we know a lot of professors didn't like some of their experiences of teaching remotely, just like a lot of students didn't. But I do think there will have been a sort of a required rethinking. And again, it would be nice if we'd been able to bring that about, not through a global pandemic. But I do think that having sort of flexed those muscles and tried new things, that more and more professors are going to be willing to rethink and to try new things and experiment, and that's just to the good. And some of those things that people mentioned, high stakes tests, long viewed as not necessarily the best way of doing things. The lecture, not necessarily, and so I'd like to think that sort of there have been people preaching some of these things before, and I do think that there's probably increased wind behind the sails in some of these directions because of the pandemic. That's hopeful to me.
Okay, I'll just answer one more question. Tips for successfully revamping curriculum when faculty aren't education curriculum experts, all who should be involved. So I would say it doesn't matter if the faculty are curriculum experts. They have to be central. And your academic affairs administrators also know a great deal, and they tend to have come from the faculty. And you can get lots of ideas from the business world, from different groups that represent minority groups, various other groups. But the faculty, whether they are curriculum experts or not, should be central to revising the curriculum. Now, if they show no interest, I'd say a college president or provost should sponsor a lecture series where they bring in from other campuses that have done curricular reviews and just talk about the process and talk about what they got out of it. I think generally they would be very impressed. So that's just my thinking on that topic. I again want to thank Coursedog for sponsoring this webcast and thank all of you for attending today. Thank you so much. Goodbye.